Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
We always try to cover stuff that you guys are interested in, and this one is no exception. Somebody actually specifically requested this one, the illusion of empowerment.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we all kind of struggle with, especially, in today's world. So we're going to be looking at three different sources today. A Stanford University report on America's political divide,
Okay.
an excerpt from an article that's all about how social media kind of creates this illusion of empowerment,
Right.
and then a Rolling Stone article about Elon Musk and uh, Twitter,
Well,
X now, I guess.
FX now, right?
It's hard to keep up.
It is. It is.
But I think it's all kind of tied together in a way, so we're going to try to unpack all of that, and hopefully by the end of this, we'll all have a little bit better understanding of how this illusion works and maybe even some ways to, break free from it.
Yeah. I mean, what I find so fascinating about this topic is how this need to belong and this need to make a difference, right? Especially now with everything that's going on in the world. It it's almost like it can be manipulated without us even realizing it.
Totally. It's like we all want to feel like our voices matter, but are we actually making a difference, or are we just kind of spinning our wheels online?
Hmm. Yeah.
So let's start with that Stanford report.
Okay.
It really dives into why American politics are just so much more intense, I guess you could say, than a lot of other Western nations.
Yeah, and the report actually uses this term American exceptionalism, this belief that America is unique, that it's great, and it's almost like this chosen nation. And they argue that this contributes to this really polarized debate that we see on like all these hot button issues, like healthcare, gun control, climate change. You compare that to European countries, and I
Yeah.
mean, their political discourse is
It's
almost,
boring, right?
yeah, a little boring.
Like if you think about Denmark or Sweden or any of those Scandinavian countries, it's like their politics are so much more practical.
Yeah.
It's not this constant battle of ideologies like we see here.
Yeah, in this report, it doesn't hold back at all. One of the quotes from it says the U.S. combination of exceptionalism with anxieties about decline has fueled a powerful emotional populism.
Wow.
And it's like this fear of losing that exceptional status is driving so much of the polarization.
Yeah. And how do you think that ties into this illusion of empowerment that we're talking about?
Well, I think it's because we're constantly being bombarded with information. Everybody has a platform, and so we feel this pressure to defend our beliefs, right? Especially when those beliefs are tied to something as deep as national identity.
It's like we're all fighting for this idea of America, even if it's not really making a difference in the real world. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
And this actually leads perfectly into that article excerpt we were talking about earlier, the one about the illusion of empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
It uses this woman named Mary and her journey into gun rights advocacy to kind of illustrate this concept.
Yeah, I thought Mary's story was really interesting because it starts out so relatable. She loves hunting. She loves spending time with her son. She feels this sense of community at her local gun store.
Right.
But then as she gets more involved in these online groups and forums, things start to shift.
Yeah, it's almost like the article is saying that these online spaces, especially social media, are designed to trap us in these echo chambers where we're only surrounded by people who already agree with us.
Exactly. And there's this quote from the article that says, while we believe ourselves to be empowered agents of change, the algorithms that govern our online experience are actually designed to keep us engaged, divided, and entertained.
Wow. So you're telling me that all that time that I spend scrolling and arguing with people on Twitter, it's actually contributing to this illusion of empowerment.
That's what the article is arguing.
Yeah, and it points to this cognitive dissonance.
Okay.
This idea that we think we're making a difference by sharing that article or debating in the comments, but in reality, we're mostly just preaching to the choir.
This is starting to feel like a trap.
A little bit, right?
Mhm.
And speaking of traps, let's bring in that Rolling Stone article about Elon Musk and Twitter, or well, X now, I guess.
Right.
This was written before the name change, but I think the insights are still so relevant.
Yeah.
I mean, remember when he bought Twitter, he talked a lot about free speech and how he was going to save it from censorship. But the article kind of paints a different picture.
It felt like Twitter was a way for him to push his own agenda, like his dislike of wokeness or whatever.
The article actually uses the phrase, the mogul of misinformation,
Oh, wow.
which is pretty harsh, but when you look at the evidence, it's hard to argue with.
Yeah, I mean, remember all that stuff he was saying about COVID back in the day, downplaying the virus, the vaccines?
It's like his personal beliefs, which seem to resonate with a very specific and, let's be honest, very vocal part of the internet, were suddenly amplified when he had control of this massive platform.
And that's one of the things the article really highlights is that after Musk took over, the moderation teams were gone. A bunch of controversial figures who had been banned were suddenly allowed back on, and there was just this huge surge in the spread of misinformation.
It's like he took a platform that was already struggling with echo chambers and misinformation
Yeah,
and just turned up the volume.
exactly.
So where does that leave us? Then we have this sense of American exceptionalism feeding into this hyper-polarized political landscape.
Right.
Then you have this whole social media environment that's designed to keep us hooked on outrage. And then on top of that, you have someone like Elon Musk with his own agenda wielding this incredibly powerful platform like Twitter. It's a recipe for disaster.
It's a recipe for this illusion of empowerment to thrive. And what's scary is that this illusion is being carefully crafted and amplified by the very platforms that we use to connect and engage with the world.
So are we all just stuck in this cycle of outrage and misinformation with no way out? This is starting to feel a little bleak.
Don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom. There are ways to break free from this illusion, and we're going to unpack those in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, good, because I'm definitely ready for a little bit of hope after all that.
Yeah, let's take a breath and then we'll jump into some potential solutions. Okay, so, we ended on a bit of a bummer note there with the whole illusion of empowerment thing. But the good news is that the article about Mary, it doesn't just point out the problem, it actually offers some potential solutions too.
Okay, I'm all ears after that last segment. I think we could all use a little dose of optimism.
So the first one, and this might sound a little radical, but it's all about stepping back from the platforms
Whoa,
themselves.
whoa, whoa. You're talking about like a full-on digital detox, delete the apps, log off completely. That seems a little intense.
Yeah, I know it's a big ask, especially now when, so much of our lives are tied to these things. But
Yeah.
the article argues that if we really want to break free from this cycle of outrage and manipulation, we have to step away from the systems that are designed to keep us hooked.
So are you saying we should all just become like digital hermits, live off the grid?
Not necessarily. I think it's more about being mindful about how we use these platforms, recognizing when we're getting sucked into those echo chambers and making a conscious choice to diversify the information that we're consuming.
Okay, that makes sense. So besides just logging off, what else does the article suggest?
Well, it really emphasizes the importance of engaging locally. Remember how Mary's story started with her local gun store, her hunting community, that connection to her town. That's where the article suggests that true empowerment lies.
So it's like shifting our focus from the national stage, where everything feels so abstract and overwhelming, and bringing it back to our own backyards, where we can actually have like a tangible impact.
Exactly. Less doom scrolling, more town hall meetings,
I like.
It's about building relationships face to face, working with our neighbors to address issues that are actually affecting us directly.
That actually reminds me of something we were talking about earlier, how European countries seem to have this more like grounded, practical approach to politics.
Right. It's not this constant battle of identity politics like we see here.
And it's interesting because the EU has actually taken a much more proactive stance when it comes to like regulating these big tech companies, like with GDPR and the Digital Services Act.
Right.
It seems like they're actually trying to like break up these echo chambers and give people more control over the information that they're seeing.
Yeah, the DSA, for example, it requires these platforms to be more transparent about how their algorithms actually work.
Okay.
And it makes it easier for users to report illegal content and for authorities to hold these platforms accountable.
That sounds like a step in the right direction, but I mean, these companies are huge. They're powerful.
Yeah.
Do you really think these regulations will be effective?
It's definitely a David versus Goliath situation, but I think the fact that the EU is even willing to take on these tech giants, it sends a powerful message.
Yeah.
It shows that there's a growing awareness of this problem and a willingness to actually do something about it.
It does make you wonder, though, if there's like a deeper agenda at play here. Is the EU actually concerned about the well-being of their citizens, or is it more about trying to curb the influence of these mostly American tech companies?
That's a really good question, and I think it's something that's worth thinking about. But regardless of the motivations, it's clear that the EU is taking a much more proactive approach than the US has been.
Right.
So, okay, getting back to those solutions, we talked about stepping back from the platforms, engaging locally.
Yeah.
What else can we do to kind of break free from this illusion?
Yeah. What else?
Well, the article also talks about how important it is to diversify our sources of information and to be willing to challenge our own beliefs. There's that quote from John Stuart Mill. He said, "He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that."
Right. It's like if we're only getting our news and information from sources that already agree with us, we're not really thinking critically, are we?
And the article encourages readers to actively seek out perspectives that make them uncomfortable, to read things that challenge their assumptions, and to engage in conversations with people who have different viewpoints.
Okay, so less confirmation bias, more intellectual curiosity.
Exactly.
I like that.
And it's not just about what we consume, but how we consume it. The article talks about how we need to prioritize depth over speed when it comes to news.
Right, because it's so easy to just get caught up in the 24/7 news cycle, and we're constantly being bombarded with headlines and alerts and stuff. But does that really give us a deep understanding of what's going on?
It doesn't, and that's what makes us so susceptible to these manipulative tactics that fuel this illusion.
Yeah.
Without a deeper understanding of the issues, it's easy to get swayed by emotional appeals.
It's like we're all addicted to the dopamine rush of the latest outrage, but we're not actually taking the time to understand the nuances of the issue.
That's a good way to put it.
So you're saying we need to slow down, read beyond the headlines, and resist the urge to instantly react to every tweet or news alert.
It's about cultivating a more mindful approach to information consumption.
Yeah.
Prioritizing critical thinking over knee-jerk reactions.
Okay, starting to see a pattern here. Step back from the platforms, engage locally, diversify your sources, slow down, think critically. What else?
Well, the last suggestion in the article is to build a community of critical thinkers. Find or create spaces where you can have these open and honest conversations with people who are also committed to challenging their own beliefs and engaging in respectful dialogue, even when they disagree.
So finding those real-life spaces where algorithms and outrage aren't dominating the conversation.
Exactly. And those connections, that sense of community, it can help us break free from this illusion of empowerment and find genuine agency in a world that often feels designed to keep us isolated and misinformed.
Okay, I'm definitely feeling a little more hopeful now, but it's still a tall order, right? I mean, we're talking about going up against these massive systems, social media giants, political machines, billionaires like Elon Musk, who are actively working to maintain this illusion.
It's a challenge for sure, but remember, these systems are ultimately created and maintained by people, and people can change.
That's true. We have the power to demand better, to hold these people accountable, and to create alternative systems that actually prioritize truth and connection and genuine empowerment.
And it starts with making those small changes in our own lives, being more mindful of how we consume information, how we engage online, and how we connect with our communities.
It's not about waiting for some grand revolution.
Yeah.
It's about taking responsibility for our own agency, recognizing those patterns of manipulation and choosing to engage in a more conscious and deliberate way.
It's about reclaiming our power, one thoughtful click, one local action, one challenging conversation at a time.
Okay, that feels empowering.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I'm kind of curious about something we've talked a lot about the American context. But is this illusion of empowerment like a global phenomenon?
That's a great question, and honestly, I think it deserves its own deep dive.
Yeah.
But I think it's safe to say that these forces that we've been talking about, this need to belong, the rise of social media, the manipulation of information, they're not just limited to the United States.
So even though American exceptionalism might be making the problem worse here, these underlying dynamics are still playing out all over the world.
I think so. I mean, think about the rise of populism and nationalism in Europe, or the spread of misinformation on WhatsApp in India.
Yeah.
The crackdown on dissent in China. These are all examples of how this illusion of empowerment can be used to control populations, to stifle critical thinking, and ultimately undermine democratic values.
It sounds like the specific issues might be different, but the underlying patterns are pretty universal.
Exactly, and that's why these conversations are so important. It's about sharing these insights and connecting with others who are grappling with these same challenges no matter where they are in the world.
Because recognizing the problem is the first step towards finding solutions. It's about building a more informed and engaged and genuinely empowered global community.
I completely agree. That's a goal worth striving for.
So, we've been talking about this illusion of empowerment and how it's kind of like a global phenomenon. But it makes you wonder, who's really benefiting from all of this? You talked about Elon Musk and his maybe agenda with Twitter. But what about these larger systems? Who benefits from keeping us trapped in this cycle of outrage and misinformation?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer.
Right.
But I think it's safe to say that there are a lot of players involved and a lot of different motivations.
Who are we talking about here specifically?
Well, for one, you have the social media platforms themselves. Their entire business model is built on keeping us engaged. right? And outrage is a really effective way to do that. The more time we spend scrolling, commenting, sharing, the more data they collect, the more targeted ads they can serve, and ultimately the more money they make.
It's like we're the product, not the consumer in this whole equation.
Hmm.
Our attention is what they're selling, and outrage is the currency.
Exactly. And then you also have political actors who can use these platforms to their advantage. They can spread misinformation, they can sow division, and they can mobilize their base.
It's just that Stanford report, how it highlighted the role of American exceptionalism in fueling political polarization. It's like politicians can tap into that belief system and create this us versus them mentality.
And that mentality is really effective at driving engagement, getting people to vote, donate, even protest. It's all
Yeah.
about tapping into those primal emotions, fear, anger, belonging.
So it's like this combination of things, right?
Yeah.
You have these platforms that are designed to keep us hooked on outrage, and then you have these political actors who more than happy to exploit that for their own gain. And we, the users, we're just caught in the middle thinking we're making a difference, but really we're just contributing to the problem.
Yeah, and that's the really insidious part about this illusion. It makes us feel empowered while simultaneously disempowering us.
Right.
It keeps us engaged in these endless debates and arguments online, but it distracts us from taking any meaningful action in the real world.
It's like that saying, the best way to control the opposition is to lead it ourselves.
Hmm.
By keeping us focused on these online battles, it allows those in power to just maintain the status quo and not actually address the real issues.
Yeah, it's a pretty brilliant strategy if you're cynical enough.
So what's the antidote to all of this?
Yeah.
What can we do to break free from this system and actually reclaim our power?
Well, we've talked about some solutions already. Stepping back from the platforms, engaging locally, diversifying our sources of information, thinking critically, building communities of critical thinkers.
Right.
But I think the most important thing is awareness. We need to recognize the patterns, understand how these systems are designed to manipulate us, and then make conscious choices about how we engage with them.
It's like that quote from Sun Tzu. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles.
I like that.
Once we understand how this illusion works, we can start to dismantle it.
And the more people who wake up to this reality, the less effective these tactics become. It's about creating a critical mass of informed and empowered citizens who are no longer willing to be pawns in this game.
That's a future worth fighting for.
Yeah.
A world where we're not constantly bombarded with outrage and misinformation, where we can actually have meaningful dialogue and work together to address the real challenges that we're facing.
And that world is within our reach. It starts with each of us making the choice to step back, think critically, and engage in a more conscious and deliberate way. It's about recognizing that true empowerment doesn't come from reacting to the latest outrage, but from taking action to create the world that we want to see.
So to our listener out there, the next time you find yourself getting sucked into that cycle of outrage and engagement online, take a moment to pause, breathe, and remember what we've talked about today. Question the narratives that are being presented to you. Seek out different perspectives and focus your energy on building real-world connections and taking action in your own community.
Because that's where real change happens, one conversation, one action, one community at a time.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and stay empowered.